Let's talk about this Hague verdict on Israel. What does it amount to, do you think, James?
I think this is really, really complicated, right? We've been facing this in Britain with the small boat crossings, Rwanda, international law, all these things. It's been a big issue going back to the Iraq War, the legality of all these kinds of things. I don't think the public are massively interested in this. I think it's a very, very murky, grey area. We find that a lot of domestic life is riddled by the rule of lawyers ahead of the rule of law, as it is anyway. When it comes to this, the idea that Israel, a nation that was founded based on the worst ever act of actual genocide, 6 million people targeted because of their, a mixture of, well, if you're Jewish, a mixture of your religion and a racial element in there as well, systematically targeted. The end of the Second World War, just when they needed to keep fighting, no, they kept the death camps going and kept killing people to the very, very end. The idea that Israel can be accused of this, I think will stick in the craw for an awful lot of people.
It's interesting. I was listening to the ruling, well, part of it, because it went on forever. It's probably still going on now.
Classic lawyers.
And all of the legalese. And it seemed to me to amount to basically saying, you know, we think you should essentially down tools, but they haven't said you must down tools. They said, you know, no more harm to civilians, in short. People should be able to give birth, people shouldn't be displaced from their homes, so on and so forth, which has given Israel basically zero wiggle room. And they've said, oh, you've got to write a letter and come back within a month saying how you're going to do this. And let South Africa know, because they're the ones bringing the case. And you think, Ramaphosa, he's hardly got, you know, much moral integrity.
Well, what, they've got to write a letter promising not to do what? What does
cause genocide, basically.
Well, cause, I mean...
Well, no, exactly.
How do you define that?
But it is potentially going to add to pressure that's being mounted, not so much against Israel, because they've had that pressure from the beginning, but about allies of Israel, the international community who have yet to condemn Israel. The ones, we've seen this in UK politics, you know, a lot of pressure from the Muslim community demanding the Labour Party, especially, backs calls for a ceasefire.
Yeah, I think this is all very complicated. I think if you look at the track record of some of these international bodies, let's just take the UN as the big one. How many of their acts of censure, their complaints, their criticism, how much focus goes against Israel? It's a huge amount of it. It's an absolutely disproportionate amount of it. You look at the kind of horror that happens around the world, the million Uyghur Muslims locked up in China being, you know, sterilised and all the rest of it, the genocides and ethnic cleansings that are happening across African nations all the time, just absolute horror around the world. And yet they go for the one democracy in the Middle East. Why?
Exactly.
Why is that? Is it because they're Jews? I think it might be.
I mean, barely a day goes by without the United Nations passing some kind of motion condemning Israel. The United Nations' hatred of Israel is an absolute scandal. But do we view what the International Court in The Hague is saying today as the beginning of their process building up towards them actually saying that Israel are guilty of genocide? Because when they actually, if they actually come to that conclusion, to that verdict, that will be a very significant moment.
Yeah, I think there's a long way to go in these things. As you say, Alex, it's all this kind of legalese that comes in and out, and you've got to come back to us and write a letter. You know, it's like trying to deal with your local council and get your bins collected or something. But on a much bigger scale, I think it's really, 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 to me, time-consuming. The fundamental point is, where realpolitik comes back into this, is that Israel suffered the worst thing that's basically ever happened to it. If you extrapolated the number of deaths that happened on October 7th for the size of the American population, it'd be the equivalent of 40,000 Americans, not just killed, raped, mutilated, their bodies attacked, all, you know, the worst things you could imagine, babies put in them, all these horrible things that, you know, we don't even want to be talking about. Israel's not going to listen to this. It's going to lead to deterioration in respect for these kinds of rulings. I think it's going to see, people are going to see it for the sham that it is. The fact that South Africa, where, you know, some political parties now screaming, kill the white man, kill the Boer at their rallies, right? The horrors that happen in South Africa as well, after the promise of the Nelson Mandela years, to see what that country has fallen to. They should know better, frankly, given the difficult history that they've got. Israel's not going to stop at this point. Hamas has to be destroyed.
So the court is, The Hague is ordering Israel to write a letter saying, we promise we won't be nasty in the future. Do you think Israel will write that letter?
I imagine they've got some of the very best lawyers you can possibly imagine, and it will be one of the punchiest letters ever written.
I think they were. I mean, it's interesting, actually, because Joe Biden's just called on Netanyahu to call a ceasefire before the American election. So you can see what Joe Biden's interests are, nothing to do with protecting the world from sort of, you know, extremely hardline Muslim terrorists and keeping a sensible nation, tooled up in the Middle East, but, you know, saving his own skin electorally.
Yeah, absolutely.
Maybe. I think he's misreading America. There's a lot of support for over Israel in America, and
There
Joe
is,
Biden doesn't quite get that.
But the way that the Democratic Party is going, a lot of their supporters will be in favour of this, right?
That's possible.
Again, it's a mixture of some of these extreme elements, some of the kind of woke elements who seem to think that Hamas are this wonderful, revolutionary force. You get freedom fighters. You get these groups called Queers for Palestine. It's like having chickens for KFC, right?
Yeah, exactly.
This is the delusion of these people.